My name is Evan. I'm not sure if you saw my email from earlier last week.
Can you remind me?
Sure, like just a follow-up email or something?
Or just, what was it about?
It's just about midterms. I was wondering if we could talk about just like...
Oh, you wanted to go over it? Yeah, Dev, I just haven't got into answering those emails yet.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I will get to it probably today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Super. Alrighty. Is that not on? Okay, alrighty. Let's get started here. Lights, camera, action. Okay, so. I think I can probably anticipate like the first 3 questions that will come up. Okay, so if you want to... Oh, someone lost one headphone. Weird. Okay, if you want to review the midterm, like I don't open it up on eClass for you to just look at, because then what happens is all of those questions get copied and they leak online, and then I have to redo the entire exam, and it's, you know, writing multiple choice questions is hard. So, if you want to come in, send me an email. I know a few people have already. I haven't answered because, you know, it was the weekend and I was sick the whole weekend, so I wasn't dealing with email at all. And yesterday I just kind of felt good enough, but I'm backlogged on email a bit. So if you've emailed me already, I will get back to you probably today or tomorrow, and we can set up a time for next week. I'll try to block off a day, like an afternoon, one day, maybe next week, you know, where I'll be in the office, maybe like a Thursday where I'm done at 12:30. I'll be there from like 1 till 4 or something like that. And basically you can just come in and take a look in your exam without letting me know in advance. If you want to schedule a specific time with me, we can do that as well. And I'm pretty flexible. I'm on campus every day. And yeah, you can look at it, ask me any questions you have on anything, on any of the things that you got wrong or right, or whatever you feel like doing. So That's usually question number one. Question number two is usually what was the average of the midterm? So the average for the midterm was 76%, which I think comes out to 34 or 35 out of 45. And I mean, that's like smack in the range that I expect. I usually expect to see the average be between 74 and 78%. And you're right in the middle of that range as a class. So everything looks pretty normal to me. Some really high scores, a couple of perfect scores, and then, kind of a big range in the middle. So nothing to me seemed too surprising. See, I told you. The curved one. No. So, all right, is there going to be practice midterm 2? There will be practice midterm 2, closer to midterm 2. I don't have it ready yet, and I'm if anything should be apparent about me, I'm not that ahead of the game ever to give you practice midterm 2, the day after we finish midterm or the actual midterm 1. Is the class graded on a curve? No, never. Arts classes should never be on a curve, so it should be whatever you get. No curving. When will marks be up for those who wrote on Scantron? Exactly 10 minutes after I finish marking them. I am working on it. I think I've got 5 left or something. I was doing them before I came to class today, but I hadn't had time to do them on the weekend or yesterday. So cool. All right. I figured that would be one of the questions. I didn't mention that one. Okay. So we're moving on from, the stuff that we talked about in the first part of the course. So all of that stuff. Now, I will just remind you, because, there's always this question that comes towards the midterm. Is it cumulative? No. So all that stuff from midterm 1, you can now sort of, put to the side more or less and not worry about it. You won't see it again on the midterm, the second midterm, or the final in exactly that form. Obviously, our 3 big schools of thought, in terms of our main theoretical schools, we're going to see come back through the whole course. Okay. But today, I guess, let's go back 2 slides. We're going to start talking about socialization, right? And socialization basically is the process by which you go from sort of unformed, as a baby into how do you become part of society, right? How are you formed into, what sociologists would call a social subject, right? How are you made into part of society? All right. So, in terms of, what is socialization? Why is it important? Well, it's a sort of key part of becoming a human being. And we know this because, we've now had kind of lots of data where we've seen people who, for whatever reason, weren't socialized properly when they were really young. And basically, if the process doesn't happen at specific times, it can't be kind of filled in later. So it's a very, very particular process. One of the really famous examples is this character, Victor the Savage of Aveyron. Basically in the 19th century, this child was found sort of in a feral state in France. Couldn't speak. Basically was living kind of wild and surviving on his own. And basically a group of researchers took this child in, cared for him, and they kind of thought we've got an interesting opportunity to see what we can do with this person who was never socialized. So they tried, giving him care, teaching Victor speech, developing, treating him like a child should be treated. And it ends up that Victor, for whatever reasons, didn't ever develop normally the way a human being would. He had missed sort of key moments in his development that couldn't be brought back. So he never learned how to speak. His emotional development was stunted and never really developed, close emotional bonds with anyone other than his immediate caregivers, and very much kind of lived at a very kind of simple life and never really became, in a sense, fully human, right? Having all those capacities we think of human beings. We've also seen lots of examples of this in different spaces. In the former Soviet Union, for example, and the former Soviet bloc, they ran these big institutionalized orphanages, where basically, people would leave unwanted infants or parents had died. And these infants were treated in this big institutional setting, right? And they were often, given basic care, right? Fed, changed, when their diapers were dirty, but not given a lot of the affective or emotional care that children require. So they would cry and no one would come to comfort them. So they would eventually stop crying. And what happened, particularly after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, is, people from the West, especially the United States, came to try and adopt a lot of these children, brought them back to, out of these orphanages, brought them back to the United States or to Canada, and then often, ended up returning them to the orphanages or finding that they had these deep-seated emotional problems. They couldn't form normal emotional bonds with people. And the research has suggested that it's because, those neural structures that created kind of normal human emotions and normal bonding, normal behavior had been neglected in those orphanage settings. And so they never developed and they never could develop, right? They basically, the human brain appears to develop kind of in sequence. And if you miss part of that development, for example, language, or, normal social relationships, it's gone forever. You can never fully rebuild what was lost. So the neural structure is responsible for emotional and intellectual development, wither and die, and they can't be kind of brought back. Not fully, anyway. Okay, so this all comes down to a process we call socialization, right? And this is, basically, like I said, where we become social subjects, the process by which we learn to function in social life and become aware of ourselves as we interact with others, right? So, how does socialization work? Basically, throughout life, people are constantly being socialized, right? It's not like, you stop being socialized at age 6. It is an ongoing process that we continue, through our whole lives. And we do this in a couple of ways. Entering and disengaging in a succession of social roles, right? As you move through your life, you will take on different roles, right? So you start obviously as a child, and you have a particular relationship with your parents and maybe your siblings, if you have any, right? You will kind of then move into school years, right? Where you take on another role, right? Now you're a student and you're in relationship with friends, peers and teachers, and then you move, eventually into adulthood, and you go to work and you get a job, maybe enter a romantic relationship, and all these things. You take on a bunch of roles. As you get older, you become maybe a grandparent, and you kind of move a retiree, and you move through a succession of different roles in life. And at each of those moments, right, there are examples and people that sort of teach you how to be in the world, right? And you build your kind of sense of what it means to be a child, a brother, sister, a student, a worker from the example of people around you and from them showing you what these things mean. Okay, and you become aware of yourself, right, through your interaction with other people. And we'll dig into some of the ways that this is sort of conceptualized in sociology and a little bit in psychology too. There's a strong overlap here. But right, you become aware of who you are in interactions with other people. There isn't like this, at least for sociologists, this core person that you're digging down into yourself, discovering who you really are. Who you are is shaped by the people around you, right? Your interactions with those people and the environment all kind of shape how you behave and your awareness of what your role in society is. Okay, so interaction, right, from kind of the early stages of infancy, right? Infants, in a lot of ways, don't have, from what we know, obviously infants are hard to study because they don't talk. But what we know about infants, right, is they don't seem to have an image of the self, right? They don't seem to know what they are. And I mean, one of the things that we've noted about infants, right, is that if you put them in front of a mirror, right, and you have them in front of a reflection of themselves, they interact with that other person in the mirror, which is them, often in the same way that they would interact with another child, right? Like I remember when my kids were really small, my in-laws have, because they live in a house that I swear hasn't been updated since the 1970s. Their front hall closet is these two giant mirrored sliding doors. And, you know, I can't remember which of my three kids it was, but sitting in front of that mirror, like kissing the image in the mirror and getting really upset that this person in the mirror, you know, wouldn't respond to them or just responded by imitating them, right? They didn't have a sense that that person in the mirror was them, right? That is their reflection. And that, you know, I can't remember what kind of age that actually kind of ends at. I want to say it's relatively early. Jacques Lacan, who is a famous psychoanalyst, referred to that as the mirror stage. And eventually they figure out that, you know, that being in the mirror is a reflection of them, right? That is them. But initially they don't have that self-image. As they interact with the world, as people talk to them, as they pick up language, they start to learn, you know, who and what they are, right? And that's kind of a normal part of being human. Okay. The self, right? They develop a sense of the self. And what is the self? The ideas and attitudes about who you are as an independent being, right? As separate from, you know, your family or your parents, or especially your mother, right? A lot of these theories will deal with the fact that infants, the first big thing that they have to do is detach from their mother, right? And, you know, I was listening to this. This is probably pop psychology, so I don't know if it's actually true. But one of the reasons that, you know, babies often, you know, their first word will be some version of dad, whatever language you're speaking, right? Is because, you know, dad is an independent being outside of them. They often see themselves as a kind of extension of their mothers, right? Because their bodies are so intertwined in lots of ways. Okay. So, Sigmund Freud, I hate Sigmund Freud, but we have to talk about him a little bit. Sigmund Freud, I will say, is well noted for his pseudoscientific jibba-jabba, most of which is thoroughly disproved at this point. But like some of the early conceptions of how this process of socialization worked were presented or proposed by Freud. So we do have to talk about him at least a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I guess he was one of the first to propose a kind of social scientific interpretation of how the self emerges, right? Basically, oh, fuck Freud, I hate you so much. I'm trying to explain Freud without sounding like a complete weirdo, because Freud was weird and had mommy issues. Totally, come on. You know it's true. If you've read any Freud or you know anything about Freud, you know he had serious mommy and daddy issues, and that is like 90% of Freud in a nutshell. Okay, so basically, right, this is Freud in a nutshell, right? Yeah, so he did note that social interaction was at the core of how the self emerges. Now, for Freud, right, I think he writes this in Civilization and Its Discontents, where most of the kind of stuff that he writes about children is. He says that, you know, basically children more or less kind of exist in this state of nature. They have, you know, these base kind of impulses, right? Things that they want, and they're very, very honest about it. They have all of these impulses, you know, they want pleasure, they want food, they want things that feel good and make them kind of happy in a very visceral sense. And that the process of becoming, you know, for Freud, civilized or you know, socialized is really what he means, is the process of sublimation, right? That you have to sublimate all of your urges. And, you know, he goes really crazy. Freud is so weird, and I can't stress that enough, right? Like down to like, people just want to poop everywhere, but it's like in learning to hold in your poop that, you know, you become human in the civilized sense. You know, there's all sorts of weird stuff in Freud, and I've probably said too much. But right, it's all about learning self-control and internalizing the norms of society as they're taught, right? You basically are repressing yourself and repressing your impulses, according to Freud. And this is how the self emerges, right? An idea of you know, me as a person and what I want comes from all of these different forms of repression. Okay. Also, he said that all men want to kill their fathers and marry their mothers. So we probably shouldn't take everything he says too literally. Anyway, I hate Freud. Oh, I have to. So his thoughts on the emergence of the self are much better than his thoughts about the emergence of religion, which I will not even tell you, but I tell in Sociology of Religion, it is completely made up. He just makes up whatever he wants. And he's like, this is probably how religion emerges. First, there's a man who has sex with all the women. It's like, oh God, it's starting. No, I swear that is his account. And then his sons get jealous that they don't have any women to have sex with, and they kill him, and then they feel bad, so they create God so they can feel better. That's like, in a nutshell, right? That's 600 pages of Freud distilled. Yeah, anyway, that's his image of religion. Freud is dumb. Okay, so much better. Charles Horton Cooley, a psychologist. And Cooley has a kind of similar idea. He calls basically the process by which the self emerges what he calls the looking glass self. And he basically proposes that there's a process that people go through as they're becoming socialized that basically allows them to kind of understand themselves in relation to other people. And basically he says that, we interact with other people, right? Especially as children, right? You're doing things, you're acting in the world, right? You move around, you make sounds, and basically you react, and then people react to you, right? You interact with them, they react to you. And basically what Cooley says is the process that's going on and how the self is formed is in looking at how people react to you, you form an image of what you think they see, right? So, you can kind of hear where I think where a lot of the focus that happened, for the millennials and the millennials' parents on self-esteem, that it comes from this kind of thinking, right? That basically you're going to imagine yourself in relation to how you think other people are seeing you. So you're going to imagine yourself as good, right? If people treat you like you're good, right? If they give you respect and they, are treating you like you're, unproblematic. If they treat you like you're bad, like you're delinquent, you're going to form a self-image of yourself as, someone who's bad, who is delinquent, who has, problems or is a problem, right? This kind of thing, which is why, when the baby boomers were raising their kids, the millennials, it was like, wow, we really need to focus on this idea of making sure that they see themselves as, good and special and wonderful and the perfect snowflake. Everyone individual and unique, not the melty kind of snowflake, though millennials were that too. So, you have this kind of idea that, well, then we have to react to them in a way that preserves their self-image because their self-image is based on what we say, right? And so this kind of notion in parenting, I think, continues on to this day. It was really prominent with millennials, not as parents, but the parents of the millennials who were raising them, right? So you judge yourself based on how others evaluate you, and you form your self-concept or self-feelings based on that set of interactions, right? So in looking at other people, right, and the way they judge you, it's almost like a mirror, right? You're looking and imagining how they see you, and that image of how you think they see you is the image that forms kind of like in a metaphorical mirror. And you then start to think, well, that's the person I am based on their reaction. And of course, this is most defined for Cooley in kind of the people you spend the most time with, especially when you're young, your parents, right? Okay, no questions. Perfect. All right. Okay, so George Herbert Mead. Mead is, another kind of thinker, again, kind of in this more psychology kind of line. But he basically suggests that, different kinds of, as opposed to Cooley, he has a different sort of notion of how the self forms. And basically, he says that the self can kind of be split into the following concepts: the I, right, and the me. So I know those sound really similar, but they're not for Mead. So the I basically is the impulsive self, right? The self that wants things that he thinks is present from birth. It's a sort of unreflexive self, right? You're not thinking about yourself as, a separate being with wants and needs and thoughts or an identity. It's just the impulses that are part of you, right? And so you can hear, in some ways in Mead, some of the same ideas as you hear in Freud, right? Where Freud has the self split into the id, the ego, and the superego, which I will not explain because they're all completely pseudoscientific. I don't want to. and Freud, there's no basis to it, but Mead, has this idea that there's this subjective self, the I, which I guess in Freud is like the ego, or the id, I can never remember. But it's like, what do you want? Like your kind of base desires, I want food, I want, someone to play with me, I want to feel good, I want candy, I want, as you get older, I want sex, all of these sorts of things. Like the base kind of desires. And for me, these are present from birth, right? The I, like, just think of it like, I want this, right? I want food. I want, and babies will express it by crying. Older kids will just tell you, I want, X, Y, Z. That's the I, right? The impulsive self. The me is a little bit different for Mead. And basically, this is the self that, like, you have a concept of who you are. Like, think about it like, this is me, right? If you were, looking at a picture of yourself and you say, well, this is me, and you can kind of list things, that you've learned about yourself from your interaction with people, right? So, as you communicate symbolically, through language with people, you form, who you are. You are, whatever your name is. Your parents are these. This is your religion or not. This is your ethnic group. This is what you like. This is what you don't like, right? These are all the things that become part of your identity, right? And obviously this continues to develop as you get older and you move through different stages of life, right? Your identity, at least for Mead, is never like fully formed. It's always kind of developing as you interact with people, which is why, people are so malleable, right? According to Mead anyway. It's like you're never kind of locked into a set identity. Your identity can change even often in really radical ways as you interact with more people and the me gets more complex or sheds aspects, adds new aspects, and all of this kind of stuff. Okay. So, Mead basically says that, the self forms roughly in four stages of development. So like the core self, from kind of childhood, from infancy rather, forms in four basic steps. And it starts with imitation, right, of significant others, generally parents and siblings, right? So this will happen, for infants, kind of in the care of their parents and probably around their siblings, if they have any, or other significant adults, grandparents, cousins, aunts and uncles, all that fun stuff, right? And basically what happens in this stage is it's a very early stage of formation, but basically, like if you've ever been around like an infant that hasn't learned to speak yet, they'll make a lot of sound, right? And they're trying to sort of like imitate the sounds that people make. Like they know there are social roles that they should be having, right? They observe social roles in the people around them. And they try to imitate these social roles. Now, they don't understand them, obviously, because they're babies. But this is the first kind of role. So if you've ever been around like a baby, right, you can like, and I guess you see sometimes like on like TikTok or YouTube Shorts. I've never watched a TikTok, but I watch YouTube Shorts because when I open YouTube on my phone, it always starts Shorts and then I can't look away for some reason. Almost like it's a drug and my brain is too stupid to stop. I'm going to go with that. It's almost like YouTube is evil and knows how to manipulate me. Strange. But you might have like someone who's convinced they're having a conversation with their baby daughter or baby son, right? They're just like, they'll like talk to them and the baby will go like, bah, 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 almost like they're talking, and they do like role taking, right? Like one person will talk, then the other person will talk. This is imitation, right? The baby doesn't know what the hell is happening, I don't think. I mean, I can't ask them because they don't know how to talk, but the assumption is always they don't know what is actually happening. They're just imitating the social role. So they've sat there and watched their parents or other significant people take turns, right? So it's like, well, that one makes noise. And then when they're quiet, then it's the other person's time to make noise. So they'll do this kind of back and forth, right? And you can do this with babies. It's somewhat amusing. It's very adorable, right? Where you'll talk to them and then they'll like try to respond, but it's all obviously gibberish. And then you respond and they get very excited because they think they're talking to you, right? And they think you understand what they want, but they don't have language. So they probably only understand on an instinctual level what they want anyway. Okay, so that's imitation, right? They try to make sounds, they try to practice social roles that they observe in other people. Okay, the second stage for Mead is a little bit more sophisticated, and it's basically the stage of pretending, right? Where they will take on roles that they've seen and basically act them out as if they were adults, right? So they will, they'll play house, they'll play doctor, they'll play school. My 4-year-old, who's super cute, but also very boring, because I love my 4-year-old, but he always wants to do exactly the same thing, which is play police and bad guy. And he is always the police and I'm always the bad guy. Which is fun for the first 5 minutes, and then for the next 6 hours gets a little repetitive. He'll lock me up and I'll escape from prison, and then he'll hunt me down. But he's pretending, right? He's in this stage of pretending where he's seen, in other kids playing or in a TV show, this role of the police officer, or he's read it in a book. And he knows that this is what police do, and then he's imitating that particular role. And he's imitated other roles before, but just right now he's stuck on police and bad guy. This very binary set. One day will I get to be the police? Probably not. I will always be the bad guy. So that is pretending, right? Taking on adult roles and imitating them, right? And this is, say with feminists, they'll say that it's sometimes at this stage that a lot of kind of gender socialization happens, right? When girls are encouraged, say, to play, house, or play, the mom, and they have a baby doll, that they pretend and they're socialized into, say, some of the roles that are typically thought of as feminine, and it gets kind of locked in because they're like, well, I'm, female, just like my mom. These are the things my mom does. She cooks, she cleans, she takes care of babies. And therefore, this is what it means to be feminine, which is why feminists will often sort of push back against this and be like, no, they should be playing with trucks and guns and whatever they want, right? So they don't get socialized into those kind of limiting roles. Okay, so this one, and this is almost always the one that messes people up, like how are these things different? How is pretending different from playing complex games? Playing complex games, as a step up in terms of abstraction, and will often involve, playing multiple roles at once, right? So games where you play a role and other people are playing other roles, and you're understanding where everybody's role is, especially, something like board games. I'm trying to think. If you've ever had like a young child, playing with Lego, right? And suddenly they've got like 15 characters going, and they sort of understand what all of those characters are doing, and they're kind of coordinating different social roles in their head, right? So this person is the bad guy, the police. This is the old lady that the bad guy robbed. This is the bank manager. This is the teacher, right? All in this kind of Lego set. Lego sets are really cool now. They were lame when I was young. But yeah, like they're coordinating like these complex games that have lots of different roles going on, where they might be playing multiple different roles all at the same time. This is, what Mead calls playing complex games. Sports fits into this as well, right? So when kids start to play sports and they start to understand like all the roles that are being played, say on a baseball field, or like on a hockey rink, like, okay, I guess if you've ever seen Timbits hockey, you know that kids don't quite have this because they all just kind of move with the puck. But as they get a little bit older, right, it's like, oh, I'm a defenseman, so I stay back and you're the center, so you go, and you follow. This is my total depth of hockey knowledge, I think. This is why I was never any good at it. That's probably why I'm also bad at Rocket League. I'm just like, but the ball is over there. I will chase it. That's what the car does, chase the ball. My son tells me this is incorrect, but whatever, right? I haven't mastered playing complex games, apparently. I'm only 41. I may still have some time. But right, you're playing different roles. You understand where different people should be, what role they're playing. All of this, is the playing of complex games and understanding that there's roles, right? Different people have different roles, and it's moving around, and you might have to switch roles at different points, right? You might be at bat at one time. You don't get to sit in the outfield the whole time, or whatever. You have to switch from offense to defense as the other team comes back with you, into your end with the puck. All of these sorts of things, right? You're learning that there are different roles and that you switch through them, and that's Mead's kind of concept. Excuse me. And then kind of his fourth one is the developing of a sense of cultural standard. And basically, this can be happening, and for me, it is happening as those other stages are going on as well. Basically, in interactions with people, you start to understand, what he calls the generalized other, right? So what is like a normal person in society, and what is it okay for them to do, right? And all of these different stages, right? The play, especially, all contributes to this, right? A sense of the generalized other. So, I mean, again, the feminist argument sometimes with these kinds of stages of the formation of the self is that little girls get locked into a generalized sense of the feminine or the female that's based on the categories they see. So, especially for our conflict theory brand of feminists, they want to break apart those stereotypes so that girls aren't socialized in, that it's maternal, it's caring for children, it's, keeping house, that's not the norms that we have for women, right? But that's basically it. Like, you develop a generalized sense of what the normal other person is and what, therefore you should be, how you should act in society, right? You understand that it's not okay to steal because you have this generalized sense of the other that's honest and good, right? You have the good guy, and then you have a bad guy, and the bad guy steals, and you know that that's not the good generalized other, that's the bad generalized other. And you apply the kind of cultural standards you pick up into the sense of like what's right and wrong, how you should be in society. Okay. Still okay. No questions? Perfect. Okay. I guess I'm finished with that slide. Yeah. Is it not working? Let me try to fix it. It's possible. It was. Maybe it's. Hang on. Now it's completely broken. There we go. PowerPoint is angry at me. What have you done? Now it's working? Okay. But now I'm not working. It was working because people were able to ask questions. Nope. All right. Sadly, I don't know what is happening. I will attempt to create a question. Slide. Okay, question. I see the question. The question will not display. All right, well, there it is. Okay, now it is working through the mystery of technology. I don't know why. Sometimes software breaks down. Oh well, it allows me to go much faster. Anyway, okay. We'll be done this year. We'll get like 10 units done before the next midterm, and then you're going to have so much material to study, you're going to love it. No, I'm kidding. I never go that fast, and I can always slow things down if I need to. The units after socialization, especially deviance and crime, get to be a lot of fun and really interesting. So if we go through socialization quick, it lets us get to some more kind of fun and grounded stuff. Okay, so, yeah. I mean, in terms of socialization, right, basically your potential, like who you can become, is shaped by the kind of unique slice of history that you happen to be living in, right? I mean, Marx has this kind of saying, that men make history, but not in conditions of their own choosing. What is it that he says after that? It's like the past, or all the thoughts of past generations weigh heavy on the living. Or of dead generations weigh heavy on the living, right? So you are a function of, the place and time that you're born into. And there's an uncomfortable aspect to this, right? Yes, you are an individual and you have agency, right? You can decide certain things, but a lot of who you are is sort of shaped by what's around you, right? So when, people think like, I worked with a guy when I was working at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, a trauma that I don't care to revisit, because it was one of the worst 3 years of my life, and I was too much of a stubborn bastard to actually quit. So I was like, you're going to have to fire me. And they're like, no, you're good at your job. And I'm like, but I hate it here. And they're like, well, fine, quit. I'm like, no. I refuse to leave because you make my life miserable. You're going to have to fire me. And we got locked into this sort of thing. This is the kind of personality I have. My wife loves it, I swear. It's like, can you just do the dishes? No, you can't make me. She lives with a child. Anyway, so what was I saying? I have no idea. I got lost. Okay. All right. You're right. So socialization, right? People, people will often be like, I never would have been a Nazi, right? Or if I was working with this guy and he was Chilean, and he's like, I would have been a rebel against Pinochet, when Pinochet was in charge of Chile. And this is like the most conformist person I've ever met. Like literally just went along with every social trend you could imagine. Like, listened to every trendy song on the radio, dressed in the most trendy way. And I'm like, yeah, sure. You're going to be the guy, Mr. I follow all the trends. That's like, I'm raising arms against Pinochet. And you're not just saying that because literally we're past Pinochet and now everybody hates him, right? It is uncomfortable to think, right, that, if this classroom were transported to 1930s Germany, not an insignificant number of you would have been Nazis, right? Why? Because everybody around you was a Nazi. All the social infrastructure around you would have been people who were becoming Nazis, and you probably would have joined in to be just in with the crowd because that's what people do. We're shaped by, we have agency. Not everybody was a Nazi, but you are shaped by the world that you're born into, right? You are, in fact, influenced by things around you. We tend to think, and this is true, I can show you the research that says millennials and Gen Z do not think that they are influenced by any social trends, and yet, we all are, right? We all are deeply shaped by the society we live in. Okay, sometimes success and failure. She's mad that I called her a Nazi. I didn't actually say she was a Nazi. I said she might have been a Nazi in other circumstances. Different sort of thing. I'm glad this is being recorded. I'm sure this will turn out perfectly well. I haven't said anything that Jordan Peterson hasn't also said, but I don't like him, so maybe I shouldn't repeat things he says. Do I not like him because he's more famous than me? Probably. Okay. Success and failure, right? A lot of, and we know this, and this is a kind of key feature of sociology outside of me joking around because I'm being silly. I told you I could slow things down. Success and failure is often something that's not determined necessarily by your ability, your intelligence, who you are, or anything like that, but by circumstances beyond your control, right? Were you born, if you were born, and you're black and you're born into 1920s American society, your chance of becoming rich and famous are radically reduced because of the society that you live in, regardless of your intelligence and your potential and all of those kinds of things, right? It would be pretty hard for, someone who's Jewish to be super successful in 1930s Germany, right? So we're shaped by our society, and our life course, the way we are able to kind of live out our lives, is also shaped by the societies we live in. So like these things like, they talk about the American dream, anyone can succeed as long as they work hard. It's like, kind of, sometimes, maybe, depends on who they are, probably. Academics are good at breaking things apart. Okay, so a lot of what we talk about, when we're talking about socialization, we talk about how people move through what we call the life course, right? Which are these different phases that people go through as they move through life, right? You start in infancy, you become a child, right? You move into childhood, you become an adolescent, a time of great horrors. I had to drive my daughter to school again today because she missed the bus again. Way to go, 13-year-old. I woke her so early. It didn't work. Adolescence, the time of horrors, and then you become an emerging adult, and then an adult, and then a parent and a grandparent, right? The life course, and then you get old. And we have courses for all of these in the department, right? There's a great class on sociology of aging and death. Why lump those two together? I don't know. Okay, so yeah, we move through the life course, we go through different phases, and these phases will vary greatly from time and place and society, right? If you went to, Western countries are all pretty similar, though they do have some differences. But if you went to, a country in sub-Saharan Africa, there might be different phases, right? And if you went to a Middle Eastern country, there might be different kind of phases in the life course, moments you move through, and different kinds of ways that you transition from one to another. A lot of this is governed by a society's rites of passage, right? Which are typically cultural ceremonies that mark the transition from one stage of life to another, or from life to death, or whatever it happens to be. Now, the West is interesting in this, that the West has actually gotten rid of a lot of its kind of rites of passage, right? There used to be, and if you look at, say, a lot of the religions that were really common in the West, they had lots of rites of passage. But for kind of secular Westerners, like there's not that many. I guess sometimes they invent them. But things like your high school graduation, is one of the few kind of secular rites of passage. People don't universally get married, but most people graduate from high school. Marriage would be another one. I think this is why now people because there's so few rites of passage, right? If you compare it to, say, like a religious system, people invent them now. So it's like, we're going to have our grade 3 graduation. It's like, what are you graduating from? The 3rd grade to the 4th grade? That's stupid. Why would you do? Anyway, I've had this argument with the school several times. But that doesn't make any sense. High school graduation, by the way, also kind of stupid because now everybody more or less needs a post-secondary education. So it's like, it used to be, right, you graduated from high school and even in the 1950s, that was most of your education. So it's like, yes, I'm done school. Now it's like, yes, I'm done. Time for more school. A lot more school for a lot of us now, 4 to 6 years. But, right, we have these rites of passage are generally these ceremonies that mark the passage from one part of the life course to another, right? So things like, say, Christianity, particularly Roman Catholicism, right? You would have baptism, right? When someone's born, they get baptized. When they get, to the age of majority, like say in Catholicism or Judaism, you have confirmation. So that's at 12 in Catholicism. In Judaism, you have a bar mitzvah or a bar mitzvah. So transitioning into kind of taking ownership of your own religious faith. Weddings, your full transition in a sense into adulthood, forming your own family, and funerals, you're dead. So your life is over and it's marked that it's over, right? These sorts of things, right, are rites of passage, and they're supposed to mark our movement from one phase of life to another. A retirement party, right, where I don't know if they do these as much anymore either, but it used to be that people would work at a company for 35 years and then everyone would throw them a retirement party. They'd get a golden watch, I think, to symbolize that time is running out for you. I don't know, watch this watch. You will see you are nearly dead. You have less time ahead of you than you have behind, and you spent most of it working for IBM. Good job. These types of things. I never worked for IBM, but for whatever reason, I thought of IBM or Toyota or whatever it happens to be, right? And basically, we have these rites of passage to mark the passage of time. And you can talk about, ones that separate, right, that lead to separation, birth. So you separate from into life, you become a new person. Adolescence, your high school graduation is kind of that. Leaving home, marriage, right, you can have sort of ceremonies around this. Transition, things like marriage, transitioning fully into adulthood and being kind of doing the learning. There's also a lot of transition. I know in kind of older cultures, there were kind of how to put this gently, ceremonies where you transition kind of into, say, manhood, right? You were a boy and then you're taken out into the woods and told to hunt something. And when you kill it, I'm making a caricature of whatever these ceremonies are, I'm sorry. Then once you've killed something, you become a man, these kinds of things. And then incorporation, right? Rituals that incorporate you fully into a new role, right? So something like, I don't know, in Catholicism, ordination, where you've been going through this process to become a priest, and then they ordain you, and now you are fully a priest, or something like this. Okay, 3 minutes. Could I give another example? No, so I will answer this one. That one's easy. They're not, life course and rites of passage are not related to me. They're just general sociological concepts. Developing a sense of cultural standards. I'll answer this and then you all can go. Don't pack up until I'm done. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. I'm trying to remember what the examples I gave were. Just in terms of watching people and understanding, you enter a school as a kindergartner, right? And you see how the older students are acting, how they move through the halls, right? How they interact with teachers. And you yourself sort of are like, oh, that's the generalized other I think of as student. And so I can be a student, I can follow those same rules and do the same things. And that's the appropriate way of being a student. And I'll know that it's wrong because when people don't do that, somebody yells at them in the hallway and they have to miss recess. Okay, let's leave it there. We'll pick it up on Friday.